My name is Cecil J. Williams, Cecil J. Williams. I was born in Orangeburg, South Carolina, 1937. My parents also from the Orangeburg area. My entire family, in fact, are products of this city and this county. So I feel that there's no better place else in the world we'd rather be rather than Orangeburg, South Carolina. I had a brother and sister. My mother was a classroom teacher, also a product of Orangeburg. My father, also from Orangeburg, was a self-employed tailor. He repaired clothing for the general public and, of course, for the stores in Orangeburg for a long period of time. During the war, he also was employed at the military base, Paris Island, where he made uniforms for the Marines. But pretty much everybody, as far back as we can kind of recollect, we are generally from the Orangeburg area. My public schooling was in Orangeburg. I went to was Felton, a laboratory school. Went to Claflin University for my BA degree and further study at South Carolina State University. I've been a professional photographer since I was about 14 years old. I started in photography at 9 years old, and by the time I was 12 years old, I shot my first wedding for $35, and that got me hooked because I learned that there was a way that I could earn a living doing what I wanted to do, and that is taking photographs. It seemed so interesting to be able to push a button, and then later get the film developed and look at the pictures. So it was a very rewarding hobby, but also it became a profession. At 14, I started letting my pictures be used by Jet, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Amsterdam News, and the Lighthouse and Informer, that great newspaper by, again, a person that we will be talking about today. That was my great pleasure to, that my life kind of became a part of what he was doing, and that I was so John H. McCray, a very, very memorable person, a person so important to South Carolina's history. At 18, I became an official correspondent for Jet magazine. Of course, that was also very exciting, especially given the time that this was the middle of the American Civil Rights Movement, and there were so many picture opportunities that surrounded my everyday life. An unforgettable period. I don't think I could have been born at a better time in history than to be present and play some role in the American Civil Rights Movement in that period of time, that period of change in America.
Okay, could you maybe tell us a little bit about how you first met John McCray?
Well, in high school, of course, I began to learn of what he was doing. He was very active, I believe, in the Democratic Party and in the pursuit trying to get people to register to vote. And you heard his name everywhere. Of course, in high school and then college, I also, as I continued taking photographs, then became associated with him because as he started his newspaper, he would use my photographs in his newspaper. And the process was something like this. This is a long time before, of course, the internet, a long time before digital media. He would come by my house and later my photography studio and actually get photographs from me to run in his newspaper on a weekly basis, so I got to see him quite often. And then the thrill of the next week being able to see my photographs in a publication like his, which went all over the state of South Carolina, mainly in central South Carolina, the Midlands, but still yet a very important voice, a voice for the voiceless, because there were just very few opportunities for African Americans in what they were doing to have what they were doing recorded, so that this could be a part of history.
How would you describe John McCray? What was he like interacting with him?
John H. McCray was an extraordinary individual. Personally, I remember him as a very caring person. He was trying to do things for his state and ultimately this country. He was involved in all kinds of activities, both in politics as well as journalism, and just in the cultural and social activities that took place in South Carolina. He was, you might say, Johnny on the spot, a man that was really multi-talented. He had an eloquent voice. He was very good at making speeches and presentations. And every time I had the pleasure of listening to him, you better believe it was a great, I walked away with great joy and delight that we had a person on the firing line in the trenches that was fighting for freedom, justice, and equality.
Did you or members of your family read or subscribe to the Lighthouse and Informer?
We did not subscribe to it, but we would pick it up in various places, or when Mr. McCray came by, he would give us the previous week. That was one way we were able to have a fresh copy of it. But you could find it almost everywhere. There was a soda shop here in Orangeburg, the College Soda Shop, where he would drop copies off to. And then sometimes he would place them in churches so that after church people would go to the rear of the church and pick up a free copy. And then there were people around that were actually distributing his newspaper as well. He had a well orchestrated type of venture. People eagerly awaited his publication. But not only that, what was in the newspaper was so very important, because see, there were not very many places. In fact, I cannot think of almost any other place where, as we were again striking out against the system of segregation, able to voice our opinions on what was happening, the white mainstream newspapers would rarely, if ever, publish what we were doing. So it was important for newspapers like John H. McCray to really have a front seat role to history and record those things that were going on. Not only that, in addition to being a journalist, he completely did all of the activities necessary to publish a newspaper. He pasted the newspaper together. He, on his typewriter, typed each and every word that went in the newspaper. He sometimes, when he could not get photographs from other photographers like myself, would even take pictures. So he was well capable of doing all the things to make a very wonderful publication, the Lighthouse Informer. And I believe during the lifetime of the Lighthouse Informer, it changed names, I believe. It was merged in with another paper. So even though this was now a long time ago, 40, 50, 60 years ago, many parts I remember, other parts have kind of faded out of my memory. But such a marvelous person John H. McCray was, a person that really deserves more attention and more to be profiled in our history books today, a person that our young children should learn about, a person that we are highlighting in the Civil Rights Museum that we have founded here in Orangeburg, a person that deserves this credit and this recognition, and surely we will do all we can so that his memory will always be enshrined.
Okay, were there, besides the Lighthouse and Informer, were there any other media sources that you read or listened to on a regular basis that helped keep South Carolinians informed about things that were going on with the Civil Rights Movement?
There were several other publications that also, again, informed the public in the black population in South Carolina. That was the Afro-American, which was also a weekly paper, as John H. McCray's was, and also the Pittsburgh Courier. And I took photographs and sent photographs, and they used my photographs as well. Both the Afro-American and the Pittsburgh Courier had a unique kind of way of combining. What they would do is, out of Baltimore, Maryland, the Afro-American itself was a basic 8 or 16-page newspaper. Then the South Carolina edition was then incorporated with about a 4-page section, which took the outer part of the newspaper, and then the whole section would become either 16 or 24 pages. And the same thing with the Pittsburgh Courier. It was published, of course, out of Pennsylvania, and of course it did the same thing. The outer part of the newspaper pertained only to South Carolina, and I believe they also had a North Carolina edition as well as a Virginia edition, because again, those were very big voids in, again, what African Americans could rely on as having news. And then of course, my own publication that I actually worked for, which was Jet. Jet 2 was a weekly publication out of Chicago, Illinois. And of course, it published news mostly of a national interest. But the Afro-American, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Lighthouse Informer was specifically about South Carolina. And so that was something that was much needed.
All right, great. So I'm going to ask you about a couple of specific civil rights campaigns that John McCray was involved in, and I realize some of these are going to be before your time. But what I'm just curious about is any impressions you had about what was going on with these particular campaigns, and especially anything you knew about McCray's role in them. So one of the first campaigns that he got involved in when he moved to Columbia was the Palmetto State Teachers Association lawsuit that happened in 1944 with Viola Duvall was suing the school board for equal teacher pay. Do you have any memories of that particular event?
In 1944, I was only about 7 or 8 or 9 years old, so I don't have very many memories. However, I would often hear my parents talking about what was going on at the time, and there were so many things that African Americans needed. Plus, my mother was a school teacher, and she was on sort of the main front of what was happening there. I do know that the Paramedic Education Association, the PEA as it was called, had some very heavy lifting to do because African American teachers were not paid the same wages as white teachers. And so there was always a battle they had to fight to bring the wages up to par with other teachers, because they were all teachers were doing the same job, but African American teachers were not receiving equal pay. But again, in the 44-45 period, I was very young and cannot have very much personal memories from that time.
Okay. Something else that happened around a similar time period is he and some other people in the NAACP in Columbia founded the Progressive Democratic Party. Do you have any memories of that particular organization and McCray's involvement in it?
Also, during that particular time, I was very young and did not know about its formation. But of course, it very definitely, everyone knew that it made an impact. Because the Democratic Party, again, conceived of itself as really being an exclusive party. You had to be a member of the party. Wherein, of course, when that case came into court, it was thrown open, giving everyone the right to vote. So this is what I remember for that period of time and that incident.
Okay. So, one of the big contributions that the Progressive Democratic Party made, of course, was contributing to the Elmore v. Rice lawsuit.
Yes.
To secure African American voting rights in primary elections. I
was also quite young during that period of time and can only have very, disconnected memories of what was going on. But of course, being that we are a civil rights museum of the state of South Carolina, we're beginning to collect that history, because that is, again, a very important, you might say, leg in the journey. You see, we stand on the shoulders of so many people and so many events. The struggle towards freedom and justice and democracy for African Americans cannot be completely isolated in any exact one period, 1 year, one time, but a continuing struggle. And bit by bit, we picked our way until we have reached the point where we are today in 2024. Things have changed. It's much better than it used to be, but there's much work to be done.
Okay. Perhaps the most significant campaign that he was involved in is also one that's obviously very close to your heart, is the Briggs v. Elliott case. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what McCray's specific involvement was in that particular initiative?
John H. McCray, Majeska Simpkins, Harold Boulware, again, and a number of Columbia-based citizens became involved in what is called the Briggs versus Elliott case. Now, that is an interesting period of time that I got kind of involved, because at 12 and 13 years old, I go to Charleston to photograph Thurgood Marshall getting off the train, coming into South Carolina to engage in the Briggs versus Elliott case. The reason it is so important, it was the first case in history that attacked segregation in public education. And of course, John H. McCray, the NAACP, and other great leaders were the ones that were moving along, not only giving, you might say, distant support to it, but actually being involved in the case and also helping to finance it. But it was through John H. McCray's newspaper that he helped to publicize what was going on. It is one of the most treasured things in our museum today. We actually have one of McCray's newspapers that shows where he was covering the case that was going on in Charleston. And by the way, what makes this so important, the Brown case, which ultimately the Briggs case becomes a part of, is nowhere even in the picture. It doesn't even come on a map until a long time later. But McCray's newspaper, the Lighthouse Informant, and his on-the-job coverage while he was in Charleston, covering the events of the trial going on there. And I should say the trial, because it was not just one time that this effort was taking place in Charleston, but over a period of really 3 cases that evolved out of South Carolina. So McCray was on the job, and again, in his newspapers, we learned so much about not only the trial itself, but some of the other things that were important to and related to the trial in his newspapers. We proudly display one of his newspapers pertaining to that in our museum here in Orangeburg.
Excuse me. At the same time that the Briggs v. Elliott lawsuit was going on, John McCray also became involved in a libel trial. He was charged with criminal libel for publishing the account of a man who was sentenced to be executed for an alleged rape. There was sort of an outpouring of support from a lot of people in South Carolina who were sending him money and just well wishes during this particular time that he was going through this libel suit. Do you have any memories of that particular incident, and what was kind of like the read of people who were involved in the Briggs v. Elliott on what was going on with that particular libel case?
We're getting up to the period of time where I become kind of cognizant of what's going on, and yes, I do remember that. And I do remember the times that he was really being charged, and the fact that he ultimately had to serve time. I also, as a side note and a sidebar to that, is really became aware that his wife worked in the business office on South Carolina State University, and she used to keep us abreast. At one time, I was the photographer for South Carolina State University, working on putting together the yearbook, and I would come upon, again, conversations with her, and she was often invited to speak about the trials and tribulations that her husband was going through. So those are some of the memories I have when McCray was charged with, and again, so very unfairly, had to serve time, again, for the small infraction of what they charged him with. I don't remember the actual case itself or a lot about it, but I remember the fact that, again, he was charged with publishing names or something associated with that, and did have to serve time in jail, charged with the libel. And they were really trying to really silence him, because he had his newspaper and his voice and what he was doing, his activities, not only to the relative to the newspaper, but involved in the NAACP activities, involved in the social aspects, in the political aspects of what was going on, were very, very crucial, and of course they tried to silence him.
Okay, so could you maybe tell me a little bit about, we were talking about the Briggs v. Elliott case and the libel trial, and so McCray did serve a prison term on a chain gang up in Newberry, and then in 1954, the Lighthouse and Informer ends up folding. Were you aware of, why didn't the paper make it? Like, what was going on at that time that caused him to have to shut down the Lighthouse and Informer?
I think after getting out of jail, and there were brief times even before going to jail that newspaper functions like operated by John H. McCray, sometimes it did not make each weekly edition. A lot of people may not know that, but sometimes there's a disruption. It was very difficult and very challenging to be able to pay the company to print the publication and distribute the publication, and having very little advertising revenue coming in, McCray was forced to close his newspaper down and not publish any longer. It was very difficult and challenging as a business to make a newspaper work. I myself can speak personally about that because the same thing happened to me. I once operated a newspaper called View South in the 80s and 90s, and I had to fold my publication again due to the lack of advertising revenue, and I was beginning to have to reach in my own pocket to finance the publication. Newspaper publishing is very expensive. You have to bear a lot of cost, and then your advertising dollars trickle back in, and not always at a time well enough for the newspaper to survive. So he was forced to fold his newspaper, and again, from that point on, I kind of know about McCray's life during the latter part of his years. He once, again, wrote for my newspaper and also a editorial content as well as a column, a weekly column. He had an article a column called The Way It Was, where he would reflect back on some historical moments and tell about an incident and then editorialize that in the context of my publication. I have in the museum a few of the actual pages from John H. McCray's typewriter, where he not only sent a one-of-a-kind copy of that to me, but also has his editorial edits on the paper as well as having one of the typewriters that he used. So we, with a museum like we have here in Orangeburg, the Cecil Williams South Carolina Civil Rights Museum, we try to put together artifacts, photographs, and documents that relate to, or we can tell a story about. So we are so very proud to have some of the memories and things that point to the life and times of John H. McCray, a legend in his own time, a person that everyone should know about, a person who we should respect and pay tribute to him for the contributions that he made to our society. There were so many in politics, in publishing, in social activities, voting. So many of these things really were moved forward and engaged in by, again, John H. McCray.
So a lot of what was written about him involves kind of the civil rights campaigns he was involved in. I mean, very much involved in NAACP at the time, the Progressive Democratic Party. But it seems after the Brown v. Board ruling, his profile drops off. I mean, this is around the same time where the paper folds. So I'm just curious, how much longer did he continue to live in the area, and how involved was he with sort of the ongoing civil rights movement? Like, I think of the students at Allen and Benedict who are leading the sit-ins in the lunch counters downtown. Did he have a hand in that? What was his relationship to this kind of like rising generation of activists?
As John H. McCray folded his newspaper, I did not know much about his history for a period of time, 10 or 20 years afterwards. I kind of reconnect with him when he is at Tuskegee, where I think he is working in public relations and also, again, writing for newspapers such as mine. But he played such an important role, we can't really jump to conclusions that he was not active even at that. I don't know too much about what he was doing on those period of times, because when I kind of catch up with him again and reconnect with him, he's in another state and on another job. It could be that because of health reasons or other, he just kind of slowed down. But we all play roles in life, and certainly he had given of himself enough times and enough circumstances to reach the point where he could sit down and sort of enjoy the fruits of the benefits of having played a very important role in politics, in publishing, in again, the civil rights movement struggles, and many of the other things he did. He was an unforgettable person, and certainly very important in my life as well. And I think of him as a mentor because, again, he was older than I was and had done so many things that I had yet to do, so many things that I wanted to do, including wanting to have a newspaper like he had. And that I did accomplish, but as I said earlier, I did have to fold it as well.
Okay, that's great. I think that's about all the questions I have. Thank you so much for your time.
I want to thank you, Dr. Trumpeter, for interviewing me today. I also want to say publicly that your role is appreciated. We need everyone to really help in this struggle that we are faced with in America. America is still really a racist country. We've got to put race aside. There is only one race, and that is a human race. But I want you to know personally that the things you've done at Allen University in carrying on the plays and having the students perform a play relative to the Brace versus Elliot, that is appreciated by the community. So we hope that you will continue in your role, because working together we can overcome all of the challenges that face us as a nation and as a people. And so thank you very much for the role that you have played as well.
All right, well, thank you so much.